suffering with a habit that's become destructive, or maybe you know someone whose habits are impacting you or your family?
A secret that is becoming increasingly out of control, or maybe even a full-blown addiction to alcohol, drugs, gambling, food, social media, shopping or pornography.
I'm Emma Heath, and this is my colleague Nat Moody. Over the next 8 sessions, people involved with the recovery course nationally are going to bring you the recovery course testimonies, real people, real stories and real transformation. The recovery course follows the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, yet as they were originally intended, a set of 12 spiritual steps where we put Christ back at the heart of recovery. We will cover one step in each of these sessions. The course recognises that our destructive habits are a consequence of pain, hurt, a broken relationship, loneliness, or an issue from childhood. The truth is we all carry pain, and it's hard to become an adult without carrying some of the baggage of life. We know that identification is key when addressing struggles, and what better way to bring hope than to share in people's stories of how they have been set free from the traps of addiction, compulsive behaviours and other destructive habits.
In this session, we will look at step 4, which says, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. If you have completed the first 3 steps of the 12-step program to the best of your ability, as a result got right with God, this week we begin the next stage of our journey, beginning to get right with ourselves. And we do this by making a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. If you think of these sessions in terms of abseiling down into a pit, this step is one of the steps at the bottom of the pit. It is one of the hardest and most daunting of all the steps. It is also one that cannot be hurried. Luckily, there is no time scale for the completion of these steps, and this will be one that is revisited many, many times. If you look at recovery in terms of treating a physical wound, this step is where we dig around in the wound with the scalpel. That doesn't sound too fun though, right? Remember, the steps are built more like a staircase than a ladder. If you are missing a rung of a ladder, you can keep on climbing. But if a stair is missing, you cannot go any further. In the same way, the 12 steps are designed to follow one on top of the other. If you haven't yet got right with God or admitted that you need help, you are probably not ready for this next step. We title this step, As You Begin to Work on Step 4. Remember this, God is for you. And as we begin to step out of our denial and into God's truth and into God's light, we will find life. Everything is built upon faith, love, and hope.
We know that there is hope, no matter how dark things feel. We encourage you to listen with an open heart to the testimonies each week and see how God can and will transform even the most hopeless of situations. He did it for me, he did it for Nat, and he can do it for you. We will now hear a short testimony from Joe from the charity Tough Talk, who has a great story to tell.
My name's Joe Lampshire, and I'm co-hosting this with Emma. As you know, you've seen me on the previous sessions. Emma's asked me to share my story with you of how I came to faith and also the struggles that I had as a young man coming to faith. So let me take you back as a young man. I grew up in Essex in a place called Loughton, and I didn't come from a Christian family at all. My father was a footballer. My mum had a business in Essex. And I had a fairly pleasant upbringing. You know, my dad was well liked and well known. My mum was very professional. I had an older brother called George, and we were like chalk and cheese. He was the good boy, and I was a bad boy, always getting into trouble. As a young boy, I didn't do particularly well at school. I wasn't interested at school. I used to mess around, play truant over the fields. I was quite a happy-go-lucky boy. Used to find myself getting in trouble a lot, I'm ashamed to say. I found myself also stealing stealing and doing silly things as a young boy. I didn't have much of a role model. As much as I loved my dad, he left me when I was very young. And I think it was at that stage, when I look back now, that a lot of darkness seemed to come over my life. And I struggled very much to try and find who I was and my identity as a young boy. As I said, I didn't do well at school, but I did excel at sport. And there was a theme that ran through my life, which was sport, that I found I had an aptitude for. Unfortunately, at a critical time in my life, my father left. He moved to California and I didn't see him for a number of years. And that really changed me. That's when I would say the darkness started to set in. That's when I started to hate life, hate people. And I became quite an aggressive, young, troubled boy. As I said, schooling wasn't really for me. But I certainly had an aptitude for lifting weights. And I can even remember as a young boy when I was at school and they had a little multi-gym and I was working out in the multi-gym and I remember my PE teacher using me as his sort of a guinea pig, if you like, to show the others how to train. So there was always an underlying a training mentality that I was brought up with. And obviously at the time you had your Rocky movies coming on and I was big into Rocky. So that followed me, as I said, as a young boy. When I got to 16, I applied for a job in the City of London, and how I got the job is a miracle in itself. So I got this job, and I found myself in the financial markets, earning good money. But the problem was, with no direction in my life, and this darkness that I shared earlier, the excesses of the city life started to overwhelm me. I got involved in the relationships, the drinking, the drugs, the partying. Everything to me was to the excess. I had no balance whatsoever in life. It got worse for me because when I hit 17, I found myself getting involved in witchcraft. So you might be thinking, well, what do you mean by witchcraft, Joe? Well, that was things like the occult, Ouija boards, spiritualism, tarot. And I got myself so engrossed in that started to open up doors that I should never have opened in my life. One evening, all hell broke loose where I was getting involved in the Ouija board. I was messing around in a place called Epping. It's a well-known pagan area. And I was doing this with some friends one evening, and all I can say is it started to attack me. The things that it was telling me that was going to happen to me, that I was doomed, that I was going to die, I'd sinned, and it scared the life out of me. The room was going cold. There was all sorts of manifestations. It wasn't a good place to be. I was very fearful, probably the most fearful I've ever been in my life. We stopped it. And I remember a friend saying to me, oh, we've got to say the Lord's Prayer now. I have no idea why he thought that was the right thing to do. But I remember saying, OK, let's do the Lord's Prayer. I need something. So I said the Lord's Prayer. And I remembered the Lord's Prayer as a young lad at school. It was something that we were always taught. And it stuck with me up until this point. And I said the Lord's Prayer. I left this evening. I left the place where I was messing about. I got on my motorbike. And as I was driving home, I remember saying, Jesus, if you're real, can you get me out of this? Because I was in too deep of what I'd been getting involved in. And I said, if you can get me out of this, I'll follow you all the days of my life. I got home, I went to bed. I remember sleeping with this big family Bible on my chest, thinking if anything comes at me, I'll hit it with the Bible. I was not in a good place. I put the Bible to one side. I continued working in London. I didn't get involved in any more of the witchcraft and the stuff that I was doing. About 6 months passed, and I was lying in bed. It was Good Friday, and my mother said, do you want to come to church with me this morning? And I said, Mum, I'm not interested. I've been drinking heavily the night before. And as I was lying in bed, I heard a voice very clearly say, Joe, get up and go. And I thought, what was that? And I ignored it the first time. And then it was the second time, Joe, get up and go. So I got up, I got changed. I said, Mum, I'm coming to church with you. She was surprised, just as I was. But this is what happened to me. As I walked through the doors of this church in St. John's, Buckhurst Hill in 1991, I got this overwhelming feeling of love, like I was being loved by a father that I couldn't see. It was like a light bulb had switched on. And then I reflected on all the things that I'd previously got involved in. I recognised that all these things were just dragging me down, were causing me problems, the drinks, the drugs, the relationships. Nothing ever satisfied. It was like putting a Band-Aid over a deep wound. It wasn't the answer. And as I went into the church, I got chatting with the vicar, and I started to unload on him all the stuff that I got involved in. And over a period of time, he said to me, Joe, you've got a choice to make. You can continue to go down this road that will end up destroying you, or why don't you turn to Jesus Christ? He loves you and he died for you. And if you put your trust in him and repent of your sins, he will be with you all the days of your life. So I decided that day to give my life to Christ. And all I can say is my life truly changed. The paranoia left. The darkness just left me, and there was a lot of darkness on me. A lot of my troubles, a lot of my insecurities just seemed to vanish. It was an amazing time. And all I can say is Jesus Christ changed my life. He's never left me. He's still with me. And I'm talking 20 plus years on now, and my life has totally changed.
Well, hello, and today we are joined by Susie Flashman Jarvis, who is a wonderful lady of God, and she has a great story to tell. So, hello, Susie.
Hi there, Emma. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Loving this series. Thank you for joining us today. I know I've heard your story before, and it's such a great story, and your testimony is phenomenal. So, would you like to tell us a little about yourself?
Okay, so now I work as a therapeutic executive coach and counsellor. I'm a mother of 4. I've got 2 grandsons. Been married for 30 years, but it wasn't always that way. Many years ago, I developed an addiction, and the journey for my addiction was. I think it started in my childhood, where I grew up in a kind of middle-class family, and was the eldest of 3 children. I grew up with an angry father who took a lot of his anger out on me. That developed in me a bit of a fighter, I suppose, a bit of someone who seeks justice and who wants the best for everybody, my mum being one of them. And in those early days, I started messing about with drugs at school. I was a child I was in the kind of top class after having a difficult beginning in education, in the top class at school, but then became like a bored middle class child who was bored in school and was trying to amuse herself. So that amusement started with selling dinner tickets and stealing my lunch up the road and spending the money that I got from my dinner tickets on cannabis and grass. And so we started off as kids buying and smoking grass. And I think I was about 14, 15, around that age. And it was at that time where there were lots of different drugs around, and I'm not sure, because I'm not young like that anymore, if the same kind of drugs are around, but LSD and amphetamine speed was around, and those were kind of part of the culture of how I grew up, with all these other girls that I'd hang out with. Meanwhile, at home, there's this aggressive relationship going on, and I'm growing up and living and surviving through that. I left home when I was 19 and travelled to India, did the hippie trail to India. Various tales of things that happened on the way there, hitchhiking through Europe and then coming back. And on the way, when came back, I got a job in the newly centres, because I'm really old now, so they were very new then. So I got this job in there as a clerical assistant, and one day this guy, someone came in to take photographs to publicise it, and they asked me to stand in as this model, which I was like, okay. And at the end of doing these pictures, I thought, I can't do this clerical stuff anymore. I'll ask him if he can do some pictures of me, which he said, yeah, fine. So I remember borrowing this wig off some woman, because I had all my hair hacked off to go to India. Borrowed this wig off this woman and went out in my little cheesecloth top and my skirt and sat on this gate with this guy taking pictures. He's taking pictures of me and he just goes one day, well, take your top off, love. I'm like, okay. So I just did. I really don't know, Emma, why I did that. Maybe I just thought there was no other way. But when I look back, I was this young, beautiful girl and I had no idea about who I was. I was a Christian. I'd been baptized, but I really lost my way. Growing up with a father who's aggressive and, violent and those things, I think impacts a young life. It definitely impacted mine. And so I took my top off and I ended up with his portfolio of black and white pictures of me with no top on. And so the only agent I could go to in London was a topless agency. And I walked in, I was immediately snapped up. Yes, we want you. And before I know it, I'm all over the page 3 of the Sun and News of the World and centerfolds of not magazines, newspapers and stuff. And I'm doing all this work until one day a film director asked to see me about doing a commercial, and he said to me, you need to stop taking your clothes off, otherwise you won't get any other work. So I stopped taking my clothes off, got a new agent, and suddenly I'm doing all these big commercials for De Beers, Diamonds and Harmony Hairspray, and I'm traveling the world and I'm in magazines with my clothes on and I'm doing really well. So this part of my life is I'm doing really, really well. And separate to that is this other part of me who doesn't believe in herself. She's living with some guy. My first trip, I always talk about her as she, like she's not me.
Yeah.
I don't know why I do that, but maybe to separate myself in some way from.
You're so far removed from that today, so that's probably why. But it's a lot of people
I
you
am.
hear, don't you, about people leading that double life? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's weird. Yeah, it's weird because I look so successful, and I was successful. I was earning good money, and I was kind of, I suppose, partly living the life. Although I never fully bought into the modelling life actually, because I didn't do the big parties and do all the clubs and stuff. Because for some reason I thought I needed to keep in this other world, which was this world of local people and people who had different kind of views on me, I suppose. But I started to be promiscuous on my first modelling trip when I was 19 to the Maldives, and I just carried on. And I was having sex with lots of different people, and alongside that, my drugs were changing. So I was smoking dope, like I said in the beginning, cannabis, grass. I'd messed with LSD, I'd messed with amphetamine, and I introduced to heroin when I was 19. But at that stage, I hadn't got a habit. I was kind of messing about with dribs and drabs of drugs. So on this one side, I'm this really successful model, and I'm living like I lived in Japan for like 6 months. I lived in Amsterdam. I travelled the world doing these things. But my addiction slowly is dripping into my life, and cocaine became a bit of a feature, and then combining cocaine and heroin into snowballs, that became a feature. And gradually it got its claws in me, and I started to lose a lot of weight. I start not to eat. I'm going from one relationship to another. My modelling work starts to dwindle off. I become really, really thin. I started off messing with the heroin. I never injected it. I was smoking it. And then it kind of became necessary to do something more with it in order to get to the same place. In fact, it's a little bit off pieces. I dreamt about 2 weeks ago that I took heroin, and I woke up remembering what it tasted like.
Yeah.
Just so powerful. I remember saying to my kids, they were like, "We're not going to take it again, are you?" No, I'm not. I have no idea where it came from, but I remember what it tastes like, and I can almost smell it.
Yeah.
And it's weird with addiction when you're free of an addiction, which I'm totally free, to suddenly get this kind of look at it and you go, whoa, flipping out, it's so awful. So
that's probably why, Susie, we have to always be we have to take this stuff seriously, and we have to be on our guard to a degree ongoing. So even though we can have full freedom, we still have to be vigilant and mindful that this can come back.
I always tell the story of selling my a ring, or giving a ring, a pearl ring that my grandfather had given me that belonged to my nan, to a dealer for a pathetic amount of heroin, before I got my unemployment benefit. See, I told you I was no longer a model, and given it to them, and they got raided that night, and I never saw it again. and the shame and the guilt of that, and how, true terrible it is to just do anything
And there's
for
so
your
much shame and
drugs.
guilt, isn't there, when you get into recovery, like of looking
It-
at, your past and what you've done, and actually accepting that that is our past, but we can do something about it now.
And that's the step 4 stuff, isn't it? Looking back and going, oh, what damage did you do? What did you do, not just to yourself, but anyone else you came in contact with, really? I got pregnant at that time, and we decided we were marrying. And this guy, for all intents and purposes, was a drug addict and alcoholic, probably. And but he said, let's do the right thing, let's get married. But I was a heroin addict, and I did a talk not that long ago, a few years back, where I talked on, I wrote a letter to my younger self, and in it I write, you're going to kill your baby. And it struck me with a real force that my heroin addiction, made that baby die, because my uterus was not a safe place. So the baby dies a month before I'm due to get married. And I have this memory of my wedding, of wearing this white dress and going into the toilets and chopping up on top of the toilet system a line of heroin and sniffing it before I walked down the aisle, and walking down that aisle and going, I am so sorry, God, for what I'm about to do. I'm getting married. I don't really remember the wedding. I know that afterwards we sold all our wedding presents for drugs. And in my book, and that's another part of my story, but the book I write on, they said, you need to put in your book something that grabs the reader. So the opening part of my book tells the story of me going to a dealer in Woolwich and walking into his house with no money, with nothing, kind of wondering, how am I going to get some drugs? I don't know how I'm going to do it. And saying to him that I wanted some drugs, and him saying to me, okay, if you can find a vein in my body, in his body, then he will give me some drugs. And I remember fumbling about on his chest, which he said was the only place that he had a vein, and wasn't a nurse, even though I'd done a little bit of training, I wasn't a nurse, feeling for the slight rise of a vein and injecting his chest with flipping heroin. And then thinking, you know what, you really might as well be a prostitute. And for me, that kind of brought up like the lowest of the low space for me. It was one thing stealing from shops, it was another thing kind of selling your body and the payment being drugs.
And that's the thing, isn't it,
But remember,
Susie? Like, addiction takes us to these dark, degrading, hopeless places. But I know there's more to what happens in your story, thankfully.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It took me to that dark place. But remember, I told you I got baptized when I was like, I think I was 17. I always believed in God. I mean, I remember taking my husband, that husband, to a little prayer meeting in Deptford and sitting in this circle with all these people, thinking, what am I doing? And but one day I went to stay at a friend's house, and I was sitting on her bed and I pulled a Bible off her bookshelf. And I did this thing where lots of Christians do this. They open up a Bible and they stick a finger on it and then they read what that is. But I did this thing and I opened up and it was on Psalm 32. And Psalm 32 says, what joy for those who confess their sins to the Lord. And it goes on through it. It's interesting, I haven't got my Bible in front of me, but it goes on to say, all day long your hand was heavy on me and my strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. And I realised as I was reading this, the room starts to turn white and I'm reading my story in the Bible. I'm like, the Bible's in English. Like, suddenly, I knew it was in English, but it kind of was English that I understood. And suddenly there is my life being written about in this psalm, because I thought that's what it's like trying to get off gear. You're like, oh, you just want to die. You're baked and you're exhausted and all those things are going on. And it says, and it's something like, don't be like a horse or mule that needs bit and bridle to control it. And I've said, okay, Lord, just can you help me? It's the first time I've done it properly. Can you help me? And that was that. I went off and told my friend, who wasn't a Christian, by the way, in her house, went and said to her, this had happened. She was like, oh, Susie, if I could just take away the physical pain that you have to deal with, you could then just do all the mental stuff, couldn't you? And I was like, yeah. And that's what happened.
Wow.
I always call myself the miracle girl because that's what happened. And I never took heroin again. So God heals me of that addiction, and which is, you know, I say it very flippantly, he healed me of my addiction.
And tell us what you're sort of doing now, because I know that, you know, you're living life to the full. You're free of the addiction. You've got God in your life, but there's more than that. If you want to like summarize what's going on in your life.
Well, now the recovery course starts next week, and I'm going to lead another women's group. I lead one of those. I've been doing that for about 5 years. I often go into it kicking and screaming, actually, to be honest, because I'm like, oh no, I've got to talk my story again, and it's really hard. But I love to see people free of their addiction. That's why I'm doing this, because I want to say, you might not believe it, but you really can be free. You really can be free. And I work with senior leaders. I'm a writer, so I've written a couple of books. I wrote my autobiography. The reason I wrote my autobiography is I trained as a therapist, and I was working at that time in a Christian charity as a therapist, and someone found me on the internet with no clothes on. And I experienced such shame at it, because at that stage I had a 19-year-old daughter. And so that's, actually I can work that out. That's 7 years ago. That's all. Seems like a long time ago. So 7 years ago, someone finds me naked on the internet. And I'm like, this is so terrible. But someone said to me, either sink under your shame or you offer it to God. And there's a verse in Romans 12. It says, offer your body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your reasonable act of worship. So I was like, okay, you can have it, Lord. And someone said, just write your story. So I wrote my And my story, it tells my story of addiction and what it's like to live as a Christian with all the twists and turns of that.
The work you used to do, but what you do now, I mean, that is like complete polar opposites. But you can use your story to help other people with exactly what you're doing. But what would you say to someone watching this as a final encouragement before we close?
I say, don't give up. My core process is about bringing hope and light. I hope telling you my story would really encourage you to know there is light at the end of the tunnel. You're just in a bend, so you can't see it. In the bend, you can't see there's light. You just got to push on, and then you'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. Engage fully with it. Look back and understand the impact of it. Not to smack yourself about the head with shame and guilt, but just to go, I can grow, I can change, I can be different, I can do this stuff. I sit amazed at what God has done in my life to give me the privilege of working with lots of different kinds of people, from NHS staff doing through the pandemic stuff, and leaders within that, and leaders within corporates, and individuals. And I just, he's got a plan.
Yeah.
You can just use Psalm 32. I tell you what, I'll share Psalm 32 with you, and you can have it as your psalm like I had it as mine. Confess your sins to the Lord. When we confess our sins to the Lord, we are free. Psalm 32, read it, read through it, read it in the Passion Version.
Brilliant.
It will cut through all the rubbish and give you a spotlight to change some stuff.
Amazing. Well, that honestly, Susie, thank you. And it's so
Pleasure.
humbling to like hear your story and from what you've been through and how you're using it for good today. So thank you for being a part of the recovery course and leading groups and just sharing your story and helping other people. And I will we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
So this week, the unravelling in step 4 is a painful process. Yet as it says in the extended serenity prayer, through hardship, we will know peace. And the process of the steps and being applied into your life and into recovery can and will bring this peace that we long for. As we begin to step out of our denial and into God's truth and light, we will find life. Keep going. It is so worth it.
The great news is the recovery course is being run all over the country and online. If you want to find out more, you can watch the full TBN recovery series, or you can visit our website, www.therecoverycourse.com, or you can email us at info@therecoverycourse.com or by searching on the social media platforms The Recovery Course.
Join us next time for session 5, where we will look at the 5th step. We look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye from us both.
Goodbye.